at the Potsdam University with some fellow master students, so Shahaude, Anna Sosinska, and Anna Suhodolova, who aren't there now, but I present in the behalf of us all. And it deals with the Akan tenseless aspect system. Well, our project led us to think that actually Akan is a tenseless language, just as you can read in the title. And well, it also led us to make some new consideration about Prospective, which I plan to share with you today. So for those of you who are not used to tense and aspect in semantics, just the basics are that time is usually coded through three different points in the time. The first one being the utterance time, so the time at which the speech occurs, well, it's a now, and the reference time, which is the time to which the speech refers, and inside the reference time, the event time, the time and the speech at which the action happens. And what we call a tense is what codes the relation between the reference time and the return time. So where is located the reference time in comparison to the now of the speech. I think that all of you know the three tenses, which are past, present, and future. So in the past, the past codes that the reference time is before the return time. In the present, both happens at the same time, and in the future, the reference time happens after the return time. On the contrary, aspect deals with the relation between the event time in comparison to the event time and the reference time. So what is the state of the action or event at the given reference time? So there are many aspects. I'm just going to present three of them now. There are some others, but they are not important for my talk today. So, for instance, we get the perfect, which codes that the event time has been carried out by the reference time. We also get, well, on the contrary, we can get the ingressive, which codes that the event time happens shortly after the reference time, or is about to happen, at least is supposed to happen. And we also get, for instance, the imperfective, in which codes that the reference time is included within the frame of the given time. So, for instance, it can be some ongoing aspect. I am playing piano, for instance, which means that the action is being carried out and at the reference time. Or it could also be some habitual, which means that the event time occurs regularly and the reference time happens during this, in the middle of this multiple occurrences. So, well, also it's possible to combine tense and aspect. So, for instance, in English, I had eaten. We see that we have a combination of the past, so I had, which codes that the reference time is before the reference time, and so combination of the past and the perfect, so eaten, which codes that the event time is before the reference time. And this is why when you hear I had eaten, you get that this has been quite far, and this has happened quite far in the past, because you get both tense and aspect. What is important here is that we consider that the language has tenses or aspect if it encodes them both on the, or at least one of them, on the verb. So, of course, it's possible to express tenses or aspects through other means, such as periphrastic expressions, context, particles, adverbials, etc. And this is, of course, especially useful for languages that are tenseless or aspectless. But yes, we will qualify a language as tenseless or aspectless if it doesn't code them on the verb. And now coming to the main topic. So Our project was on Akan, which is a Kwa language, which belongs in the Niger-Congo family, and it's mainly spoken in Ghana. The traditional view of Akan says that Akan codes both aspect and tenses on the verb. It codes them via prefixes or suffixes, depending on which one we want to code. Some affixes can also be combined, which is interesting. And on the traditional view, there are 6 tenses or aspects, which are so 4 aspects: habitual, progressive, perfect, ingressive, and 2 tenses, or we will discuss that later, but yes, they are called the future and past. So here's just a quick overview of this tenses and aspects in Akan. As you can see, some of them are prefixes, some of them are suffixes, and we're mainly gonna focus on the 3 last ones. So the ingressive, which codes that the reference time is before the event time, with some movement toward the event time, the event. And the so-called future, well, we're gonna see that. Which is supposed to code that the reference time is before the reference time, and the past, which is supposed, so-called past, which is supposed to code that the reference time is before the reference time. So in the first part, we're going to discuss these 2 last tenses, and we're going to discuss whether they are past or actually perfective, or whether they are future actually prospective. So our claim here is that Akan is a tenseless language. And then in the second part of the talk, I'm going to make some additional considerations about prospective, how it can be unified with ingressive, and how it constitutes a major two-way distinction in Akan. So first, with the so-called past, so here in 9, we can see that there is a low tone and lengthening, which is supposed to express, past. At least it expresses that the event is completed before the returns time. So as you can see in the graphic here, that event time is before the returns time, but still, knowing that the event time happens before the returns time is not enough to know what actually the low tone and lengthening codes, because even though most literature on the subject says that it codes that the reference time is before the reference time, and therefore, if it codes the relationship between reference time and reference time, it's past. It could also be that it codes that the event time is before the reference time. So it mainly depends on where you would locate the reference time there, if you would think that it's the same as the reference time or the same as the event time. Okay. And Osam 2008, which is an article on which we base a lot of our analysis, claims that the low tone and lengthening should be considered as a perfective or completive. Here it's the same, because it is not compatible with imperfective marker. So, and you can see in 10, you can express progressive through the prefix array, and but you cannot find both the prefix array and the low tone and lengthening on the same verb. Although the meaning, logically this should be possible if the low tone and lengthening is expressed the past, because they're, on a logical point of view, they are both meaning are compatible. And actually, if you want to code past imperfective, you can use some other means, such as the particle na, which codes a lot of things, but here it codes past. So you can express coffee was eating. You cannot express it by using the low tone and lengthening combined with the progressive marker. So for Osam, this is just sufficient to claim that the low tone and lengthening isn't a past but a perfective. However, this didn't seem sufficient to us, because this incompatibility could also be triggered by some other reasons we don't know yet. Well, maybe it could be some morphological reason, some phonological reason, we don't know. And therefore, we wanted to explore how, to find another way to explore whether the low tone unlengthening expressed a tense or an aspect, past or perfective. And for that, we had to find a context in which the relation between the event time and the reference time was different from the relation between the reference time and the return time, so that we could make a distinction between them both and know what actually is coded by the low tone unlengthening. And this is where, well, when you want to test this kind of thing, this is where complex sentences are actually very useful, because you can play with all the times that the reference time, the return time, and the event time. So we came up with this sentence that you can read in 12. Tomorrow evening, Mary will eat a cake that she baked. And this sentence is quite ambiguous. Actually, the interpretation of this sentence differs from depends on the context. And so we asked our native speakers to translate this sentence with two different contexts. The first one being given in 12. So Mary baked the cake yesterday, but she kept it and she plans to eat it tomorrow evening. So the cake has already been baked, she will eat it tomorrow. And with another context in which Mary has planned to bake a cake tomorrow morning so that she can eat it later that day. So both events, both the cake baking and the cake eating happens in after the reference time. And in 12, as you can see, both contexts trigger the exact same elicitation. So it seems that there is an ambiguity. Well, this sentence alone is ambiguous. Actually, if you read this sentence in the context of 12, there is still an ambiguity regarding what is coded by the low tone unlengthening, because of course you know that the baking of the cake, well, the baking of the cake has already taken place by the return time, so it's before the return time, and you know that the eating of the cake is in the future, right? But you don't know exactly what relation is coded with the reference time. So it could be that the reference time corresponds to event time of the baking of the cake. So that was the same time, and then the low tone unlengthening would code that the reference time is before the return time, and then it would be a past. But it will also be that the reference time is the same as the return time, so defined by the main clause, and so or that it could also be that the reference time is the same as the time of the cake eating, which is defined by the matrix clause. And in both cases, well, what is coded is that the event time is before the reference time here, and then that would be a perfective. So in that context, we cannot know much about what is coded by the low tone unlengthening. However, if you go with the context in 13, Mary has planned to bake a cake tomorrow morning so that she can eat it later that day. You know that all events take place after the return time, so that the baking of the cake is after the return time, and the eating of the cake afterwards. Well, that's logical. You cannot eat a cake that hasn't been baked already. So you know that it cannot be that the low tone unlengthening codes that the reference time is before the return time, because it wouldn't make any sense here. Actually, there is not reference to any past there, so it's not possible. The only thing that is possible is that the low tone unlengthening codes that the baking of the cake happens before the eating of the cake, which is the reference time there. So that's how we know that it's a perfective. And actually, if you take that sentence, which is in 12 and 13, out of the blue, just without any context, and if you ask some native speakers about it, they will tell you that there is an ambiguity regarding the interpretation of the sentence. And they cannot tell you if the cake has already been baked by the return time, which is logical, because since we get an aspectual marker, not a tense marker, we do not know anything regarding the relationship between the return time and the reference time. We only know that the event time is before the reference time. And so there are two possible interpretations there. Either you consider that the reference time is the returns time by default as defined by the main clause, and then the baking of the cake being before the reference time, then you get the baking of the cake happening before the reference time. Or you can also consider that the reference time is coded through this local context time of the matrix clause, so that it's the same as the cake eating. And then the event time is just before the cake eating. It could be, well, so it can be after the returns time. Actually, it could also be before the returns time. You don't know. And this is why you get an ambiguity, because the aspect doesn't tell you anything regarding the relation of the baking of the cake and the, well, between the reference time and the returns time. So yes, it only defines the event times is before the reference time, and it's a perfective. One last sentence that goes with our point is this one, the translation of the seminal church example of Quetzal 98. Who built this church? So in a context in which you are in front of a church and you're wondering who built this church, the low-tone announcing appears in this out-of-the-blue question about the past, but it's well, it's kind of logical to find a perfective there, because in this question you get mainly an emphasis on the completion of the building events, and you do not need any anaphoric reference time, because what is important there is that the event has been completed and not that it's in the past. Although, of course, both are the same in this context, because, well, if it has already been completed, then it's in the past with regard to the now. And now I'm going to discuss the future, where it's roughly the same argumentation there, but yes. So for OSAM 2008, the prefix bay plus high tone codes future. Well, in other means, it codes that the reference time is after the returns time. Of course, when you want to code future, well, future is never just a genuine tense, because by nature it's uncertain. If it hasn't happened by now, you cannot know for sure that it will happen. So future always carries some modal considerations, but hopefully here we get, it would code that the reference time is after the returns time. And for some, it's the only tense that we can find in Akan, and we disagree with that, because actually when you read this sentence, Ben will think, you just know again that the event time is after the returns time, but you don't know exactly what it's what the prefix, the bay plus high tone, says about the reference time. It could be, of course, that the reference time is after the returns time, and then the event time happens at the reference time. So it could be that it's a future, but it could also be that it's a prospective, which would mean that the reference time is at the same time as the returns time, and then the event time is after the reference time. And well, we do not see anything that would go in favor of the future arguments. So once again, we would need to make a distinction between tense and aspect, and we just did the same thing that as we did with the low tone announcing. So we found a complex sentence. Yesterday, Mary baked the cake she would eat for her birthday, and we presented it in two contexts. So the first context being yesterday morning, Mary baked a cake for her birthday party, which is tomorrow, so in the future. And in the second context, which is that yesterday morning, Mary baked a cake for her birthday party, which was in the evening, so it has already taken place. Of course, if you get this, well, and both contexts again trigger the same elicitation. So, of course, if you get this sentence in the context of 16, this is ambiguous. Well, the role of played by the bay plus high tone is ambiguous, because it could be that the reference time is corresponding to the event time by default, and then you get that the reference time is before the reference time. It's a future. But it could also be that the reference time corresponds to the reference time by default, as coded by the main clause. or is corresponds to the baking of the cake as coded by the matrix clause. And then in both cases, you will get that the bay plus high tone codes the event time happening after the reference time. But again, if you take another context and the same sentence with this other context, this is immediately clearer that it can only be a prospective, because here we know that the eating of the cake has already taken place yesterday evening. So the eating of the cake is before the now of the reference time. And the only thing that can be coded then by the bay plus high tone is that the reference time, which is then coded by the matrix clause and it corresponds to the baking of the cake, is before the event time. And you cannot get, well, then again, it wouldn't make any sense to say that the bay plus high tone codes that the reference time is before the reference time, because there is no, it wouldn't make any sense to have a reference time in the future. And then again, if you find this sentence without any context, out of the blue, there is an ambiguity regarding the interpretation of the sentence. You cannot know if the cake has already been eaten by the reference time, because of course, it depends on where you would locate the reference time. If you would locate in the main clause, so reference time by default, or if you would locate in the matrix clause, so in the local context time of the matrix clause, so corresponding to the baking of the cake. And then it could be that, of course, if it's if the reference time corresponds to the reference time, then it is as a future. Well, it's not a future, but it gives the same results, that being that the event time is after the reference time. But if you take the reference time being in the past, being at the same time as the baking of the cake, then the event time could also be in the past, or could also be in the future, of course. And yes, the reference time is either interpreted as being present by default or as the time of cake baking, but in both cases, it is not defined by the target verb. It is defined by how you interpret it in that context. So this is why we would claim that the bay plus high tone only defines the reference time is before the event time, and it doesn't say anything about the location of the reference time with regard to the reference time, and therefore it's a prospective and not a future. What is also interesting with this bay plus high tone is that you can also find it in a sentence which only deals with anteriority, apparently. So you find it on the verb in this sentence: before Mary baked the cake, Ben had sung a song. So you get the reference time, you get the Mary baked the cake, and before that, Ben had sung a song. And you don't get, at first sight, you don't get why exactly you would get bay plus high tone in that context on the baking of the cake. And it could seem weird that answer triggers the use of bay plus high tone, well, even though the event has already taken place by the reference time. But actually, this is something common cross-linguistically, that the particle before is triggers some weird tenses or moods, such as in French, for instance, where in this sentence, before Mary baked a cake, Ben sang a song, you find that the verb to bake as a subjunctive. Whereas if you just take the exact same sentence, but with after instead of before, after Mary baked a cake, Ben sang a song, you get an indicative. At first sight, it could be somehow weird that there is a subjunctive here, but well, actually it seems to be a property of before, since when you embed an element in before, then you get some reverse sequence of time. So it would mean that if you say before event A, then there was event B, you imply that there is a time such that event B happens before this time, and the event A is supposed to happen at that time. So you locate you locate both events in the reverse order, well, in the ontological order, and then in comparison to event B, event A hasn't taken place. So before embeds the verb in an uncertain frame of time, well, uncertain regarding the event B, of course, in which the target event has not happened yet by the reference time nor the event B, which then explains the subjunctive or the prospective. Because here in that sentence, you get that the prospective B plus Highton, it expresses that the reference time is located before the event times of Mary's baking a cake. Actually, you get a lot of things in that sentence. This is super interesting because the answer, of course, codes the relation between the events A and B there, and the B plus Highton is called by the fact that the event A happens after the reference time, which is defined in the past by the particle now. But then you get why there is a prospective, you get why there is a B plus Highton, because actually there is a prospective expressed in that sentence, even though you wouldn't say it at first sight. And well, I promised to come back to the ingressive marker, so here I am. There are two different markers. So the first one is, I've already talked about it. It's the B plus Highton. It expresses prospective, and there is also a marker which is the B plus low tone, which expresses the ingressive. Most Akan native speaker would translate it as Ben comes to sing, so it expresses a movement toward the beginning of the event. We could also translate it as Ben is about to sing for the sake of clarity, but it really means Ben comes to sing more than Ben is about to sing. There is some movement made by the agent, and in the traditional view so far, well, all literature so far, B plus Highton is different from and B plus low tone are two completely different markers. So one expresses a tense or a future. Well, we claim that it's actually an aspect, it's a prospective, and just they're expressing another aspect, which is ingressive. What is interesting with the ingressive is that it's a marker that can be combined with other spectral markers. So such as the low tone and the lengthening on low tones. So Ben came to sing, the perfect, Ben has come to sing, and the progressive, Ben is coming to sing. But however, it cannot be combined with a prospective marker. You cannot say Ben, baby, tone one, Ben will come to sing, even though that would make sense because the B plus Highton is also a spectral marker, and on a logical point of view, this would make sense, you know. So we could wonder why they are not compatible, and our hypothesis is that B with high tone and B on low tone are actually one same marker B without any tone, and this marker would then convey a wide range of prospective meanings, including ingressive. And then the grammatical tone, so high tone or low tone, would add a modal distinction to the marker. And well, the low tone would add some distinction close to the future rate. So we would code the B as this, so coding that there is a time such that the reference time is before this time, and the event is supposed to happen at that time. And well, of course, on some realistic modal base or in some inertial worlds, because of course there is always some uncertainty. Well, there can be some uncertainty there. And then you would get some stereotypical ordering source or politic ordering source, or well, there is a wide range of meanings that are possible with this marker. And then, as I said, the grammatical tone would add a meaning or modal distinction to the marker. So if you apply the low tone on B, well, in my view, it's the low tone that is applied on B, because I think by default, B plus high, the high tone is the default on B. And especially since it can convey a wider range of meanings. So when you apply the low tone on B, you make another distinction and you say that the agent makes a movement toward the beginning of the event. And yes, this another thing that would go in favor of this interpretation of B being the same marker is that they are the only marker both B with high tone and low tone are the only marker that combine with the negation marker, which is a prefix. So you can express Ben will not sing or Ben does not come to sing by expressing the two marker, but you cannot find the negation marker with other aspectual markers. So it seems that B with high or low tone are quite similar on this point of view. And well, if you want to, if you express some negation without any other aspectual marker, then you get, well, since the other marker is erased by the negation, you get some blurred interpretation of the verb. So here, John and Cecil and Eloy, you get just the negation, and there are multiple possible interpretations of this sentence. It could mean that John didn't clean his car, or that he hasn't cleaned his car, or that he doesn't clean his car, he's not cleaning his car, he hasn't been cleaning his car. You can get a word. Well, there are many possible interpretations. The only interpretation that is not possible is that the sentence doesn't mean John will not clean his car or doesn't come to clean his car. So the negation and some null marker, absence of marker, negates the events before or until the reference time, but not after the reference time. So there seems to be some huge distinction between what is coded by B with either low or high tone and what is coded by by the West, by a null marker. And so it seems that this absence of marker or null marker expresses non-prospective. Since it negates some prospective interpretation. And this is in line with OSAM 2008, because OSAM claims that there is a two-way tense distinction between future and non-future implied by the B marker or the null marker. Well, OSAM doesn't give any argument for that. I would say that this negation effect is quite an argument for that, even though in our view, the two-way distinction is not a tense distinction, because it's not the B is not a tense but an aspect, but still there will be some major two-way distinction here, which can be expressed in 28. So that B would code that there was a time after the reference time such that the event is supposed to happen at T, and the null marker would express that there was a time before or corresponding to the reference time such that the event is supposed to happen at T, and all of them aspects then would happen within this frame of prospective versus non-prospective. So to conclude, I think I'm a bit ahead of time, I'm sorry. What you should remember from this talk is that complex sentences allow to differentiate between tense and aspect expressions, and that can be useful when you investigate tense and aspects. And as for Akan, it's a completely tenseless language without any tense, at least expressed in the verb, of course. And so there isn't some aspectual marking of the verb, so there is perfective, prospective, and some other aspects. And if you want to make some tense distinction, you would need some perfect expression or particles such as now, which codes past. And of course, regarding the aspectual marking, but also just, yes, the aspectual marking in general, the tone can sometimes induce a modal distinction. And finally, the prospective, there was a major two-way distinction between prospective and non-prospective in Akan, a frame in which all other aspects are coded. So thank you for listening, and also thank you. I'd like to thank Malte Zimmermann, which was our teacher and gave us the opportunity to do this project. I think he's here today, so thank you. And I would also like to thank our consultants, Justin Alate and Paul Omane-Okere, who helped us conduct this research project.
Okay, thank you. Now we have 5 minutes for questions. First question, Natasha.
Thank you. Yeah, I was waiting for you to unmute me. Thank you. I have a clarification question. Maybe I missed something. So you treat data from complex sentences as indicative of the fact that this is aspect and not tense. But we are well aware of sequence of tense effects, and we know that languages differ. we have Russian that doesn't have sequence of tense. We have English and German that does. And under the sequence of tense analysis, we expect the same thing. So tenses aren't always relative to the utterance time. So I'm wondering why this is not a tense of, say, English type. And especially with before clauses, we know that there is cross-linguistic variation, how tenses behave in such environments.
I'm not sure I quite understood the question here, but maybe I should come back to one of this complex sentence. So if we take that one, for instance, you would say that it could also code a tense, right? It could also code that the bay plus item would code a future regarding to some due to the fact that it is a sequence of tense, right? Well, I think that's mostly a matter of what you would define as a tense. And in our view, we would say that tense. Of course, it can be debated, but the tense is what would define the reference time with regard to the utterance time, which is always a no, the time of at which the speech occurs. So in that example, there is the bay doesn't code any precise item doesn't code anything with regarding to the utterance time. It just codes some it codes that the event time happens after the reference time, which is within the sequence of tense. And that's why I would say that if you get a sequence of tense, then you deal with the reference time and not the reference time. And that's why I would qualify it as an aspect. But of course, if you define tense differently, you could say that it's a tense. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, but yeah. But there's lots of literature where you don't treat tenses as lexical to the utterance time.
Yes, I know this is debated. Thanks.
So if I may, we discussed it last week, but there was just no way to look at shorter sentences to get the right data, right? So in a way, Jean is aware of the fact that we just need to look at like non-complex sentences in the right context to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, the next question goes to Augustina.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So I actually have a clarification question, and then I'll talk to you afterwards. I have more. So when you talk about the verb with low tone, you call it what you're calling the ingressive aspect. So it's actually what is happening in that case is what you have, like you just have vowel harmony. The actual particle is ba, which is come. So kofi betonium. But if I said he came to buy, it would be kofi. You can have it with ba, and then it co-occurs with your future. Kofi beba betonium is fine. So you can have the co-occurrence. And the reason why people call, like, we don't call it a tense for people who don't call it tense or aspects is because there's also the core marker, which says like go, kofi kotonium versus kofi betonium. So I don't know if you look at core and ba in that context. Yeah, I can say kofi ba betonium if I don't use ba. Kofi ba betonium is fine. Kofi came to sing. Kofi beba betonium, Kofi will come and sing. You can actually have that in Akan. It's just that the actual particle you're looking for there is not be, is ba, which is the actual form of the particle that people would use there.
Yes, you're right. It's possible to express when we come to sing, but then you would use two verbs and you would embed the singing, the verb to sing, so to, in the other verb, which would be then beba. So you would get ben, beba, beto, right? No.
Yes. But it's what you call an ingressive. It's just what you have in here is like vowel harmony. That's what is happening to give you be with a low tone.
Yeah, right. So you would say that it's a matter of phonological reasons and not
so I don't know reasons. if this would be an independent aspect of tense in Akan, like.
But I would say it's kind of, I know that there is this beba beto possibility, but then there are two verbs and just one, it's just a construction of several verbs, I guess. So one is embedded in the other one. And that's why I would take this construction as being maybe different from what we were investigating, such as just the combination of marker. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there. And for sure,
usually people don't
yes,
call
go
it
ahead.
serial verbs, because I can also say kofi beka kotonium, what people would just treat call as a they call it the emotional prefix, and not, those sentences are usually not called serial verb, but it's also possible to call that serial verbs. I just don't see that in the literature most often. It's just treated as emotional prefixes, which shows the direction of the speaker. So it's either or beba, like come in your direction or go from your direction.
Yeah, okay, I see. And actually, that would be interesting to investigate it with co, as you mentioned, because since it has some meaning close to the ingressive meaning,
yes,
that should be interesting. Yes.
Also,
Okay,
with the complex. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, it seems that we are running out of time, so it's better to move on to the next topic. Right, but of course the discussion can be continued during the break or in Gather Town later. Thank you very much. If the